You're listening to the Reinvest Podcast, where each Tuesday we show business owners and entrepreneurs how to reclaim, reconnect, and refocus their life by bringing you the top real estate professionals in the industry. We'll help you diversify into real estate by equipping you with the tools and tactics to build generational wealth. Your hosts, Garrett Gatton and Seth Ciminillo.
Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Reinvest Podcast. It's good to have you. As you can see, things are a little bit different in the studio. We got a special guest today who needs no introduction.
Let's go. It's me.
Garrett Gatton.
On the other side of the table.
On the other side of the glass. So today we wanted to do a little bit of a different episode. There's been a lot of change going on in the real estate market. There's been a lot of change legally going on with the National Association of Real Estate or National Association of Realtors. And so we kind of wanted to dive into what is all the change, because a lot of people we've talked to have heard of something happening, but they're like, I just don't know what it means, or I don't know what it is. And so today we wanted to unpack this massive lawsuit that has been going on with NAR, the National Association of Realtors, and how that has changed things for real estate agents and realtors. And what does it mean if you're a buyer? What does it mean if you're a seller? What does it mean if you're an agent listening to this? How is that going to change your business? And so I brought in the professional on the matter, Garrett, into the studio today.
Kind of the authority as a realtor of 5 years. So, no, one of the reasons that
you were a realtor before the National Association of Realtors was even implemented. That's how old you are.
Yeah, no, it's true. And I've got just good genes that way. One of the reasons we wanted to talk about this is because we are investors, but we are realtors. And so we're kind of seeing this from the investment side as we buy and sell property. And we're also seeing it from the realtor side as it's affecting our industry and what we do for still the bulk of our income. And we wanted to communicate that today. If you're a buyer in the market, you're a seller in the market, or you're an agent, our goal today is to unpack this so that you know you're prepared moving forward, really, because there's a lot of headline stuff that comes out that I think is misleading, or it just communicates a portion of what is going to happen. And that really is probably not even the most relevant information that you need to know as somebody who's going to be buying or selling moving forward. So one of the things I wanted to do first, and I'm going to throw this to you, Seth, is let's back up a little bit, because a lot of people don't even understand the difference between a real estate licensee and a realtor. And we need to almost define that, because this class action lawsuit was filed against realtors.
Yeah. So you can, in every state, you can go through and take the class to become a licensed real estate person, right? So you can go ahead and get your license, and you can just hold that license, and you can do real estate just like how I would, and you do not have to join the National Association of Realtors. So you got your licensure, and then you got another level of that, which is becoming a realtor, which is essentially adhering to the code of ethics and to some additional rules that the National Association of Realtors has. And so that's kind of the difference. So there are things in this lawsuit that really don't apply to a licensed real estate agent, because the lawsuit was brought against NAR, the National Association of Realtors. And I don't know, I would say the biggest difference is that, like, if you become a realtor, like I said, there's like additional, like a code of ethics and a standard.
You're held to a higher standard.
There's a standard that the National Association of Realtors enforces. And so it's kind of like just another layer of a governing body, because you're still going to have the division of real estate that's going to govern all real estate agents.
At the state level.
But then you have the realtors. So that's the biggest difference. There's a small difference.
And here's a really easy way to say that. Not all real estate licensees are realtors, but all realtors are real estate licensees.
Yep.
And real estate professionals, as kind of synonymous with realtors, that accountability does push us to have a higher level of professionalism than somebody who has a license, who's just a licensee. Here's why it's important, because that specifies who's being affected by this. The lion's share of real estate licensees in the U.S., and I don't have this percentage, are realtors. So most everybody who has a real estate license in the country is affected by this. moving forward. So here's a brief timeline to kind of show you when these events have transpired, over what kind of timeline they've transpired, and some dates that we're now kind of following or being affected by. So most people don't realize that this lawsuit, or these lawsuits, there's 3 of them, they happened as far back as 2019 when they were filed. And so this has been kind of a slow burn, slowly working its way through the court system. And really the nuts and the bolts of it is that there was a group of sellers who came together to file a class action lawsuit against the National Association of Realtors with the accusation that NAR was price fixing commissions. Price fixing meaning they were mandating or kind of like locking in a certain commission structure as normative and as mandatory across the board. Now, that is erroneous in that commissions have always been negotiable between seller and the agent that's listed that. However, interesting to note that the panel the jury that was hearing this court case, none of them were homeowners. They were like all renters, which is pretty wild.
So they had good perspective.
Great perspective. So I don't know how that happened or why that was allowed to happen, but it did. So here we are. We're on the other side of this. I'm not really going to get into like what are like our thoughts on was it good or bad. There was a lot of misrepresentation of the narrative there, but I think there is good that can come of it, and it's going to hopefully raise the standard for real estate professionals moving forward.
Well, and here's something else to know as a consumer. And I think most brokerages work this way. All brokerages work this way. Me as an agent, I can't dictate the commission structure that I offer. Like the broker has to approve the commission structure because all the commissions are getting paid to the brokerage. And so there's some misconception there thinking that
Seth
these agents
gets the final say.
Yeah, these agents are going out representing their brokerage, whether it's Keller Williams, Hartsock Realty, whether it's Century 21 or Remax or whatever. These agents are going out representing their brokerage, and really at the end of the day, they have to stay within the confines of what their brokerage allows. So I think that was some of the misconception that sellers were hearing, was saying like these agents are all saying the commission is this. Well, at the end of the day, they have to listen to the brokerage. So the lawsuit was brought against NAR and some of these big brokerages that are members of NAR, and I get why they felt that way.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I do too.
Because
you just hear like, 6%. I have to list at 6%. But just to play devil's advocate here, things that were so competitive in the housing market over the last 4 or 5 years, in our listing appointments, we started to get squeezed and felt that pressure for sellers to want to list for less and less commission. And so that, I guess, is also credence that there is...
It was always negotiable.
It was always negotiable. But April 23rd of this last year, the preliminary court approval was given for one of these class action lawsuits. Then fast forward, over the summer, NAR was communicating with their membership, realtors nationally, hey, this is how it's going to change, how we move forward. Really one of the biggest changes for us as a listing agent is we can no longer advertise the commission split on the MLS. Now, that probably doesn't mean much to you as like a consumer or a client because you're not interacting within the MLS. But as a seller, one of the benefits of working with a realtor is they have access to the MLS, which is where I put your property on a database that has 400 other agents in our area taking their buyers and looking at those properties with all of the information they need to make an educated decision to hopefully, purchase your home. And on that listing that other agents are interacting with, I was able to communicate the predetermined commission split that buyer's agent could reasonably expect if they brought a client to your home. So that is now done, gone away with. If I list a home on the MLS, there is no talk of commission percentages, compensation, and it's all being negotiated per deal, per offer. And really now it's the buyer's agent and the buyer that are setting the expectation of who's paying that. So August 1st is when our association, West Central Association, implemented these policies. So like literally a couple weeks ago, this was a reality for us. And when I looked and my buyers said, hey, I want to go look at this house, I went on the MLS and there was no expectation of how I was going to get compensated from that. So that's a part of how this is changing the conversations between buyers, agents, sellers. August 17th is when the actual implementation happened from a nationwide perspective. Every MLS across the nation is doing away with advertising what commission splits are available. And one note here, I think this is where a misconception happens with sellers. Sellers have been hearing, hey, I don't have to pay a commission anymore. When in reality, what's happening is that commission split is not being advertised to a buyer's agent.
Right. The sellers were upset in the lawsuit about paying for the buyer's agent's commission, because that's maybe how it was poorly explained by their listing agent, or maybe that was the perception. But the perception was that the sellers were like, why do I have the burden of paying the listing agent commission and the buyer's agent commission? And, that was the lawsuit. They were colluding to keep commissions high or commissions set, and that they were being forced to pay for these buyer's agent's commission.
That was the accusation.
That was the accusation. It wasn't correct. The listing agent was saying, hey, I'm willing to split my commission in order to attract a buyer's agent. And at the end of the day, that buyer is the one paying all the commission because they're bringing all the money to the deal. So it feels like this is all like semantics and everybody's just like pointing. But really at the end of the day, it was always negotiable. And at the end of the day, the buyer is still paying the commission. It's just through the loan. And now the perception is, I don't have to offer as much commission, or I don't have to pay as much commission because I am no longer responsible ever for paying a buyer's agent's commission. And that's just not exactly how this is going to pan out.
And we'll unpack that a little bit further about how it could save a seller money and how it might not. So then just to kind of wrap this up, October 24th, Ohio passes House Bill 466, okay? Essentially what that means is realtors were obligated to adhere to these policies. One of those policies was implementing exclusive buyer representation, okay? And essentially, we'll talk about that a little bit later. Ohio then made a House bill. So this is not being implemented now from NAR. This is being implemented as a law from the state of Ohio.
State law.
That all real estate licensees must practice exclusive and non-exclusive buyer representation. Again, we'll talk about that in a second. November 26th, which is a date that hasn't happened yet, that is the court hearing for the final approval of the lawsuit. So we're really in the window of a lot of these things being finalized, things already being implemented, and that's probably why you've started to hear about it. Maybe you've been confused about it. So let's just jump in here first. What does this mean for a buyer looking at a home moving forward?
So how it's worked historically for a buyer is the buyer says, hey, I need a buyer's agent because I need to find a home. And the buyer's agent's like, great, let me show you the homes. And they could start working together immediately. No agreements have to be signed. A consumer, guide has to be signed with the brokerage and some stuff like that. But there's no contract that the buyer's signing.
No obligation.
There's no obligation for the buyer. And the buyer's agent is then using the MLS, the multiple listing service, to determine how much they're going to make from the houses they're looking at, because compensation was being offered by the seller, by the listing agent.
Because you don't want to work for free?
Because I don't want to work for free as a buyer's agent. So, and everybody knows, usually buyers are short on cash. For one, especially first-time home buyers. I mean, they're already expending so much cash on a down payment. They're already expending so much cash in closing costs for a loan. And guess who's getting all the money in the transaction? Usually the seller. So the buyer's agent, or the buyer would work with the buyer's agent, and basically the buyer's agent knew that they were going to get paid if the transaction closed. And it was from the proceeds of the buyer through the loan, and it was an agreement of compensation that was being offered already on the front end.
Usually by the listing agent splitting that commission.
By the listing agent splitting their commission.
Yeah.
And sometimes things get negotiated in a deal, and maybe some of that commission can change even in a deal, to get it done. Because, again, it's just negotiable. But that was how a buyer's agent got paid. So the buyer they were really responsible for getting getting across the finish line with the loan, or if it was a cash deal or whatever. Everybody wins. Everybody would get paid. That is not the case anymore. So now on the front end, we have to have these exclusive buyer's representation agreements signed, or non-exclusive, that dictate on the front end, hey, buyer, you need to sign an agreement with me as your agent that you're going to commit to me, and here's the time limit you're going to commit to me for, and here's the amount of money you are going to pay me for me to serve you.
Mm-hmm.
And so now it's kind of putting the burden of the commission on the buyer on the front end of the transaction.
Right.
And, possibly
before you even have written an offer.
Before we've even looked at houses.
Hey, we're going to go look at a house, or house is, and we need to specify all of these terms.
And so really this is putting a bigger burden on most buyers, because now they're like, okay, I got my closing costs for my loan, I got my down payment for my loan, and now I got commission that I'm going to have to come up for, and that's cash. I mean, that's not getting financed into their loan. Right. That's money that they're going to have to bring additionally to the transaction, and it's really putting the burden on them. Now, that's not the end of the story.
Right. So
take it away.
There are different ways, so when we enter those conversations now with a buyer, when we're signing these with our clients, and I think here's a positive, right? This is not all negative. One positive is the buyer and the agent can have confidence that they are both committing to each other. I think historically there's been a perception that buyers can just shop around with other agents and be like, well, I'll look at this agent, I'm going to look at a house with this person, and then maybe the next week I'm working with a different agent to look at that house. That is not advantageous for an agent, because essentially they're using their time with no commitment that it will actually be profitable for them and they can make their living off of that. So from an agent perspective, there is a commitment that is good that the buyer is making. Also, though, there is a commitment that is good when you sign one of these agreements as a buyer. Your agent, and and this is the caveat, find a good agent. Because if somebody is willing to sign an exclusive buyer representation agreement with me to go look at properties, I am going to take that I already take it seriously now, and I'm going to take that serious and throw my full weight behind it, because I know that there's a mutual agreement that we're going to try and find you a home. So I think it is a good thing, and that it specifies and kind of defines the relationship. There are scenarios where somebody might call me out of the blue. I don't have a prior relationship with them. We're meeting each other for the first time, whatever the scenario is. Hey, I want to go look at this house. And we can enter into non-exclusive buyer representation agreement, and we're still kind of learning what all this is. And Seth, you were just diving into this to understand this better. What is the difference between something that's exclusive, I'm working with this agent for this time period, versus non-exclusive?
Yeah, so regardless of exclusive and non-exclusive, both agreements have a time period. So, I mean,
and a commission expectation.
Yeah, a time period and a commission expectation. So, I mean, the time period could be as short as you want it to be. And the commission, I mean, really, again, that can be as small as you want it to be. I don't want to work for free, so it's not going to be like $1. So I'm just not going to work for free. That's not prudent.
The agent and the buyer are going to have to come to an
it's not a good
that.
business model. But the agreements could be a day, a week, 30 days, 6 months, a year. But an exclusive agreement means, hey, I am going to commit to you as an agent exclusively. I'm not going to shop around with other agents, and I'm going to use you. And if we buy a house, it's going to be through you, and you're going to get paid. I like those. Most agents would probably prefer that, especially if it's someone that they know. Now, the non-exclusive is someone that's maybe you don't know very well, or they don't know you very well, or maybe they just feel skittish about being locked into an agreement, and they're going to say, hey, I will sign this non-exclusive agreement because I want you to show me this house. And, if I buy this house, then yeah, sure, I'll use you. But I'm going to still probably look at other houses with other agents. I'm not going to commit to you, essentially. And so obviously there's less of a commitment from the agent to you as well, because you're not committing to them. They're not necessarily committing to you. But we got our ducks in a row. We got this document signed so we can show you this house. And after that point, maybe you get to know each other. you can always sign an exclusive, and you could always make that jump to signing an exclusive agreement. But that's kind of the difference between the two.
Yeah. And again, I think the biggest thing here is have a conversation with your buyer's agent. This is a conversation, because when I sit down with a client who's wanting to look at a home, I need to understand what is their financial situation and how is that going to inform and dictate the commission expectation. And I'm just telling you from a buyer's agent perspective, got my buyer's agent hat on, we're going to do everything that we can to negotiate that commission into the deal and to come from, the listing agent or the seller, so that burden is minimized or offloaded from you, because you're already bringing closing costs and out-of-pocket expense, inspection, down payment, all of that stuff, and it might be too much. But we still have to kind of plan for as though the buyer's going to be responsible for that, and then we're going to work as hard as we can to make sure that.
Let's talk about that. How would you, so I'm a buyer, I'm going to sign this agreement. Let's just say I'm going to commit to 3%. But I'm like, man, that's a lot of money. I don't know if I can do that and everything else,
No.
So what would you do as my agent?
Yeah, so if that was the case and we knew that was going to be, a wet bite, there's different ways for us to be able to approach it. And it's already kind of happening now in some ways, because the closing costs are a very similar kind of conversation where buyers say, man, I need the sellers to participate in the closing costs. And let's say the sellers are like, well, I'm not paying your closing costs. And then we say, well, what if we came up a little bit on the purchase price and ask the sellers to cover that as a way to give the seller their net number, but essentially roll those closing costs into the purchase price and into your loan. That can still happen in this scenario where we could say, hey, seller, the buyer wants you to pay a 3% commission. The seller says, I'm not going to do that. Then maybe we can come up a little bit higher on the purchase price and then have that seller offset some of the buyer's agent compensation. And then, the biggest thing with that, there is a limitation, and it's got to appraise. We have to get through the appraisal for that to happen, but that is a way to do that. Another way to do that would be to say, hey, I'm proactively calling on behalf of my buyer to these listing agents to kind of field and get a lay of the land on what the commission expectation is. Sometimes it's really easy. And this is what I want to encourage you as buyers. There are sellers that know in order to get the most access to the buyers out there in the market, I am going to offer compensation to the buyer's agent, because they don't want to have any barriers for a buyer to not come look at their home. Because at the end of the day, what drives a fair price and like good terms on a home? It's demand. And so you bring demand by having the widest buyer pool. And so sometimes the listing agent says, yeah, we're offering compensation. Great, easy conversation. Let's go look at the house. Hey, buyer, I'm already protected. I'm good. And you've just been alleviated this commission obligation. So those are a couple ways you can kind of look at it.
And then sometimes it could be split down the middle. Maybe the listing agent is going to share part of their commission, but maybe, it's not the amount that you had agreed with your buyer. So maybe the buyer now only has to come up with half of it or something. Right. So there's kind of different ways to slice and dice that.
It's not a one-size-fits-all thing.
It's not.
Again, that's why you need to have an experienced agent that can negotiate.
And if you're a seller listening to this and you're like, well, I'm just never going to offer, buyer's agency compensation, or I'm not going to, negotiate high enough with my listing agent so that they can share their commission as they see fit. And you're just like not going to do it because you're like, I've been set free from the chains. Well, here's the conversations that are going to happen depending on the price point of your home and what kind of buyer demographics can be looking at your home. That buyer's agent's going to call and say, hey, are you as the listing agent offering any compensation, or is your seller offering any compensation? And they're going to say, nope. I'm going to go back to my client, my buyer, and I'm going to say, hey, buyer, if you wanted to pursue this home, you'd be on the hook for the commission. Do you want to go look at it? Because they've already indicated that they're not going to negotiate compensation. And they're going to say, no, let's go. Let's try to find something else so you can get paid too. Because they have an agreement with me that they signed that I'm going to get paid. And so to them, it might be worth skipping that house altogether and looking at a different house that is offering compensation because it's going to save them money. So I just don't want sellers to automatically think, I never have to offer it. I never have to, commissions are always going to be half of what they were. I just don't think it's going to work that way. I think it's going to take some education. But you know what? I really do think it is going to make things more competitive.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I guess that's the silver lining.
Yeah.
Like, I think it will make listings more competitive. I think it will make commission structures and prices more competitive. So I think at the end of the day, sellers are going to win out on this. I think it is going to be a little bit different for them.
Yeah.
But I think it's just going to put the burden on the buyers. It's just going to make it hard. I think it's going to be a hard transition, and I think it's going to take 12 months for things to feel a little bit more normal for everyone.
I see two foreseeable ways that sellers, their commission structure is gonna play out. One is what we talked about, kind of what we just came out of traditionally, right? I'm going to give my listing agent X percentage with the understanding that he or she is going to turn around and cooperate with another buyer's brokerage to get the widest access. The pro there is access to the widest buyer pool. The most demand is going to get you the best terms. The cons is maybe you forego the possibility of saving a buyer's agent commission, right? That is a con of that. It is a possibility. The other, scenario, which is what we're talking about, is option number 2. I'm just going to give my listing agent a commission because they're representing me, and we're going to put the burden of the commission on the buyer to take care of their agent. The pro of that is you have an upfront agreement that potentially will have less money out of your pocket. The con is it creates barriers now for buyers who can't afford to pay their buyer's agent on top of all the other closing costs and expense for the buyer, which is going to potentially reduce demand. So there are both sides to it. And honestly, I'm having sellers they see value one way. They're like, hey, we want to have the widest access, the most demand. That's always made sense for us. It's just logic. Let's keep doing that. And then I have people that are like, hey, let's test the waters and see what happens and have them negotiate. And
the nice thing is that even if they say, no, up front, I do not want to offer any type of buyer's agency compensation.
Right.
It's kind of okay. I mean, sure, maybe some buyers aren't going to look at it, but we can say, hey, just try to, if you want to come look at it, negotiate it in your deal.
Yeah.
And, so through that, maybe the sellers at the end of the day would still be willing to offer something. They just don't want to commit to something up front.
Right.
And I understand that. I think we would all understand that. I think especially as investors, we're trying to keep as much money as possible. I mean, that's at the end of the day, people are trying to sell their houses for money.
Right.
What? And, what? And but I just think you gotta just be open to it. Do you want to sell your property? Yes or no? Just be open to it at least, even if you don't want to commit to it on the front end.
Yeah.
Let's see what kind of deals come in. Let's see what kind of offers we get, and then you can make. You're still in the driver's seat.
Well, because here's the reality, right? You start out, you say, I'm not paying a buyer's agent commission, right? I'm just going to have a listing agent market my property. If that property sits on the market for 30 days with no offers, you might feel a little bit different, right? Yeah. And that just shows that things are on a spectrum and that things are negotiable and things change with the market, with time.
Which I think is one of the benefits of this lawsuit.
Yeah, right.
I really do think it's going to be a net positive once we get through the turbulence of it. Obviously, as like real estate agents, it feels more uncertain for us. And it feels kind of like, oh, this is dumb. Things are changing. But I think it's going to be a net positive. Do I think it's going to drastically lower commissions? No, I just think that's false. Like, I think that's just wishful thinking. Is it going to lower prices like some people think in housing? No. If anything, it's going to, like, people are like, oh, I'm saving more money. They're not going to like lower the price of their house because their commission's less. That's dumb.
That would be like saying, okay, the seller's like, oh, okay, cool. I don't have to pay the buyer's agent commission. Let's come in a little lower then because
it's not going to happen.
I'm gonna pass
people.
that on to the buyer.
Whoever out there has been thinking that. I've seen articles about that. I've seen people on the news say that. That is false. That is not going to happen. That's not how capitalism works. That's not how America works. So I don't know, but I think overall it's going to be net positive. I think it will weed out some bad agents.
Yeah.
I think it will. I think bad agents will leave. I think agents who aren't aggressive will leave.
And let's be honest, there was some fat, kind of on the bone.
Yep.
And that's getting trimmed up. And you said it right. Competition. It's going to foster competition.
I think it's going to make people more aggressive, and I'm kind of excited for it.
Yeah.
Some of the new conversations it's opened up has been kind of fun.
Yeah. And
does it make me feel more uncertain about when I'm working with buyers? Yes. Yes. I do feel a little bit more uncertain.
Well, but I think here's some of the different responses that you'll see. Some people will just be like, you know what, not worth it. I'm going to leave the industry as a real estate agent, hang up my license.
Good.
Some people are going to be like, you know what, I got a little, it was very easy when things were moving fast, interest rates were low, and I got lazy in not educating my clients about what the expectation was of working with them. And so now that's going to heighten the education level, which is only going to benefit buyers and sellers when agents are doing that. As a buyer, if you're like, oh my gosh, I now have to sign this exclusive agency agreement, it's probably feeling like it's freaking you out a little bit. I just want to frame this in context. There were 18 states that were already doing this, and that was normative for how real estate was done.
Yeah.
This is the first for Ohio, so I know it's kind of like, oh, what is this? Your agent is not trying to trick you. It is literally a law. And if you look at a house with an Ohio agent and you did not sign an exclusive or non-exclusive agency agreement, your agent just did something wrong. It could lose their license.
At the very least, they're going to get fined if they get found out. So, I mean, if you wanted to, you could report them. But don't.
We're taking this really, we're taking this
kidding.
seriously. We're taking this seriously with our clients. And we think it's going to be a good thing moving forward for everybody. And from a seller perspective, you just need to weigh out the pros and cons of commission structure and how that's going to affect the marketability of your home. Really, that's what it comes down to.
And I think there's just going to be a lot of trial and error moving forward the next 6 months, next year. I think things will kind of normalize. Right now it's new and change is always a little bit hard. I think it will be, I think in 6 months or a year from now, we're not even going to think about this.
Hopefully this has given you guys a little bit of context as to where this came from, why these changes are happening, and how that's going to affect you as a buyer or a seller. What I would encourage you, just to kind of end this episode, and I know it's a little bit shorter and a little bit different, but these are massive, unprecedented changes that we have seen in the real estate industry, at least in the last decade, and it warrants taking time to explain this. If you're a buyer, reach out to the agent that you've been working with or find a good agent, because those exclusive agency or non-exclusive agency agreements, they are legally binding. And so they do matter. They're not optional. There are buyers that are going to, if they sign multiple exclusive representation agreements and buy a home, they could be on the hook for multiple commissions.
Yeah, don't lie.
Yeah.
If you're already signed something with someone, you just need to resolve that first if you want to leave that agent. You need to talk to that agent and get released or something.
And it's just going to increase the level of communication between buyer and agent. So before you sign that, just make sure that that's a real estate professional that you would want to work with. And maybe commit to a time frame that feels manageable for you.
Maybe commit to 30 days or less to start out. And
if
then
you're
say, hey, if this goes
for
well,
6 months, maybe it'll expire at the same time your agency agreement would. So there's different ways to look at that. But it just means you need to know what it is you're signing, that you're not being tricked. This is just the new normal moving forward. So agents, if you're listening to this, hopefully this is going to help, you figure out how to communicate some of this stuff to your clients. We're still trying to kind of walk this out. Up until a couple weeks ago, the state of Ohio and NAR were changing the documents weekly. So we are finally, I think, coming to, the dust is settling a little bit. But reach out to us if you have questions on this topic. We won't ask you to sign anything. We're trying to educate through this. So maybe you have more questions than answers at the end of this. We'd love to be a part of that conversation. As always, excited that you joined us for another episode of the Reinvest Podcast. Stay tuned every Tuesday for new episodes. And if you want to learn how you can use your hard-earned capital to diversify into real estate, go to our website, lv5capital.com, and shoot us a message. Move farther, reach higher, and grow deeper. We'll see you next time.